In general, thank you for your testimony and your service and your frank assessment on some of these issues. I appreciate your written testimony focusing on missile defense, and I'd like to dig into some of those issues this morning. It's when, not if, that North Korea is going to be able to range the continental United States with an intercontinental ballistic nuclear missile. Isn't that correct?
I believe it is, sir. I think they already have the capability to deploy an intercontinental ballistic missile. The question is, when will they be able to make a nuclear weapon?
So it's going to happen. I mean, we have classified estimates of when it's going to happen, but you can say publicly that's going to happen.
Yes, and I'll show you the dates the classified or the intelligence community predicts that will happen when we talk tomorrow. It's fairly broad, but I'll show you those dates.
So one of my concerns has been, if we know that that's going to happen, which we do, and the day that that does become public, that they can do that, I think there's going to be a big demand. It'll be on the front page of all the newspapers and magazines that, the leader of North Korea can range Chicago or Miami or New York City with the nuke. There'll be a lot of demands to do something immediately because of that. So if we know that's happening, it's my view that we should be focusing a lot on missile defense to make sure that we'll have 99.9% chance of shooting one or two or three of those down and be able to say publicly, if you do that, we'll retaliate massively. That'll buy who's ever in the White House some time. We talk about sooner. I think it's sooner rather than later. Can you give the committee a sense of why the date February 11th was so important in terms of this very troubling issue?
So thank you, Senator. I'm a big supporter of missile defense. I have been for my whole career. But February 11th was a very important date because that's the date that
February 11th of this year.
Of this year, the North Koreans launched a new, solid, medium-range ballistic missile off a new transporter-erector launcher. They published pictures for the entire world to see out of a place we'd never seen before. That showed a new technology, a new North Korean capability to employ a very challenging technology for us because a liquid missile has to be...
liquid fuel you're talking about.
A liquid-fueled missile.
Versus solid fuel.
Versus solid. Has to be stacked, fueled. It takes time, and we can watch. A solid rocket can be rolled out and launched at a moment's notice. And if you noticed our history of building ballistic missiles, in the early days we built liquid-fueled rockets, and we had some challenges because liquid fuel is a dangerous thing to try to keep ready and on alert. A solid is a much better solution. So all of our inventory now is solids.
So that was a major advancement by North Korea.
It was. They moved what was demonstrated at sea onto land, onto a new launcher, and did it in a very quick way.
Let me ask you a related question. You talked about the history of our programs in terms of rockets. Do you think there's a culture that we have now with regard to missile defense? We had a provision in the NDA last year that required the Missile Defense Agency to test at least once a year, tried to test at least once a year. Do you believe we have a culture that focuses too much on always having successful operations in terms of testing? Why is it important to also allow us to fail?
I think I've become part of that problem too, because when Admiral Searing tests, and I'm either on the phone or waiting for that email that says, did it work, did it work, did it work? And that fundamentally creates the wrong kind of test environment. If you look at what North Korea is doing, test, fail, and I look at what I did when I was a younger officer in the space business, that's how you go fast. Von Braun, in the early days of the rocket business, he had a 60% failure rate, maybe the greatest rocket scientist of all time. Can you imagine if Admiral Searing and Missile Defense Agency had a 60% failure rate, what the newspapers would say? In reality, we should be asking, was that a successful test? Did we learn what we needed to do to advance the system? And were we testing fast enough? Because North Korea is going fast. Test, fail, test, succeed. And they're learning, and you can see them learning because that's the way you do the rocket business.
So you think we should be doing at least testing once a year? And can we help with regard to that narrative and culture to make sure you're learning but not always having to make sure it's a quote-unquote successful test? Can a test that doesn't hit the target still be a successful test?
In many cases, we'll create conditions where we don't want to hit the target, and then somehow we'll still be portrayed as a failure. But we need to understand how long the interceptor can fly. We need to understand various things about a test. A test program is not just about hitting the target. Ultimately, the system is about hitting the target, and we have to learn fast as we go through that.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.